Well, hello, friends. Hey, Mike Falkenstine here with 1A Catalyst. Welcome you to the latest episode of Missions Talk. And I'm here again, of course, with my friend and co-host, Steve Schirmer. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's
Good.
like I said, very nice day outside. Well, minus the heat and the humidity. It's nice.
That's right.
It's sunny.
That's great. And now, those of you in South Carolina, you're probably looking forward to kind of turning the corner into the fall, and because actually fall can be quite nice there, can it?
You know, growing up in Texas, we had two seasons. Hot and cold was not that often. But here we've got the four seasons.
Mm.
So not every fall is that great. I think last fall was just a little bit so-so in terms of the fall foliage. So I'm hoping this year it'll be really nice, especially with the mountains not far. It gets really nice up there
Oh,
during the
great.
fall with all the colors. So yeah, we're
So you go up
ready.
there.
It's too humid and it's heat index is triple digits right now. So I'm ready. I'm ready for the summer to be over.
All right. So now, for now, you're in your kind of your indoor season, and then you're looking forward to be able to get out and about in the fall.
Yeah, it's just not pleasant to sit on the patio right now. It's
That's right. It's like I'm hot and sweaty, and it's no fun.
yeah. So yeah, I'm
So
ready for the fall.
that's great. Well, good. Well, Steve, I'm excited about this latest episode of Missions Talk. We are now in actually, it's interesting. I was going to say we're in a post-COVID era, but we really are. It's just a different era, right? I mean, it's sort of we're not doing the same quarantine type things, but you just mentioned hearing about a hospital in Tampa that's all their beds are full with people that are that have COVID, and so it's kind of it's a different COVID season, but certainly as we talk about missions, which we like to do here on our show, we did want to talk about kind of missions post COVID, and maybe we should say missions post the initial, era of COVID. And so really what we want to talk about is kind of missions kind of in this next year or two and what that's going to look like. And because we do have still a great commission that we're called to fulfill, and yet, for those of us like you and I that were used to, pre-COVID,
Mm.
traveling 3 or 4 or 5 times a year overseas, and kind of getting projects started and overseeing different things, different projects, that is all just going to change tremendously, isn't it? And so we're going to talk about some of these challenges. And I mean, Steve, I think you'd agree that we definitely have some challenges going forward in our in missions, don't we?
Yeah, I would say that kind of the way I'm looking at this is I think our biggest challenge is just adjusting.
That's right. A
We
lot of
we all
adjusting.
yeah we all agree that the Great Commission, our engagement doesn't need to end. We need to
That's
keep
right.
pressing in and pressing forward. But how we do it, I'm at a point where I strongly believe that if we're just waiting for this stuff to end so we can get back to business as usual, then we are missing a prime opportunity to take this moment to assess, to reassess how our engagement
Mm,
is, what adjustments we need to make, and what we need to do moving forward. Rather, I don't think we need to go back to business as usual.
that's
I
right.
really don't. I think this needed to. I think we need to look at this as a. It's not really a wake up call, but more of
Okay.
moving forward
Kind
in
of
the
a
future. We need to be more
yeah,
strategic
reset.
than we've been,
Yeah, that's right. I would agree. There will be no back to normal. I totally agree.
and
And
that's okay.
you are, yeah, and you are, there will need to be some kind of a reset. And actually, I do agree with you too that, as we're kind of looking forward and saying, okay, Lord, what is it exactly? How should
Mm,
we as, Westerners be involved?
mm,
There will be a lot of changes, and I actually think, and I would agree with you, that these changes are not bad. In fact, they are good. We should have done something like this, some time ago, and some of the things that we'll be talking about in today's episode, because the Westerners in general, were too, I don't want to say in charge, but had kind of an upper hand for sure. And the nationals that we serve with look to us, too much for resources, and where now they're going to have to do, some of this themselves. And so for people like you and I, and many of the people listening and watching today, Steve, I think the first challenge that we have and the first reset that we need to do is that, we're just going to be a lot of restrictions getting into a lot of these countries, right? I mean, nationals will have to do way more of the work, and they're going to have to trust God to be used without Western help. And, and partially just because we're not going to be able to get there. You and I were just talking before we started. I didn't even know that you and I like to fly on United Airlines, but I'm assuming it's the same for the other airlines that do international flights. Right now we could not get on a plane and go to China, one of the places where we both have spent a lot of time, and their borders are closed. And even I looked up, so where I live in Denver, there has been a nonstop flight to Tokyo. Now I can go to Tokyo, but at $2,400. I mean, that before COVID, that was maybe $1,000 flight. And if you could get a good deal, it'd probably be less than that. I mean, I've traveled to China for $750 at different times of the year, and so that
my last
really
ticket to China was $550 round trip.
Oh, see, so. There's going to be restrictions, and even as that begins to reopen, it's just going to cost a lot more, isn't it? So that really is a restriction, isn't it?
Yeah, last summer when I went to the Middle East, it was where I went. It was the first time I went, but one of the guys traveling with me had been there before, and the ticket prices were already double what they were pre-COVID. And,
wow.
Like many countries, you have to do a PCR COVID test before you go. And that can be expensive depending on the time frame you want it returned back to you. Mine was $200. And then we had to do a COVID test coming back, came back.
Okay.
Now, those who were unvaccinated had to do a COVID test on arrival, not just before you go, but before you go and the moment you stepped off the plane. There was a whole line of kiosks of people doing COVID tests, and you were required to take it if you were unvaccinated or couldn't prove your vaccination status. And then when you went to tourist sites, you had to do another COVID test if the other one wasn't done within a certain time frame.
Wow.
And so some people were doing 4 or more COVID tests on their trip. And if you've never had one, it's like having your brain examined with a Q-tip. And but it's just the requirement. The country, I mean, I've always taken insurance when I go, but this country required proof of insurance before. And we not only had to show it on arrival, we had to show it at our connecting airport in Vienna before we even boarded the plane. We had to show proof of insurance.
Okay.
So, it's a little bit more hassle. Some places are more restrictive than others. Where I went wasn't even that restrictive, I don't think. But, some places have quarantine. So, all this is impacting whether people even want to go.
There's a lot we can talk about in this area, but because I think you and I both have heard of a lot of these stories.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the discipleship pastor at my church, his daughter and her wife felt like God was leading them to plant a church in Chile, and they've had to redo all of that. They're now in Knoxville, Tennessee for a time, and working with some other people, and they just can't go to Chile right now.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of that. And so between just the restrictions and it costing more, it's really going to affect sort of short-term missions as well, right? I mean, this whole model that we've developed of 8 people from your church going to a place, serving for 10 days. I mean, that's going to be severely restricted because you may not even be able to go there. And B, if you do go there, and like you mentioned, you're COVID tested every 2 days, people just maybe like, that's probably just not worth it right now.
Mhm.
So that's certainly going to change. And then secondly, nationals, and maybe that's what be interested to hear from you about, Steve, is, since in your ministry, you're serving with a lot of nationals in places, they're going to have to trust God to be used in ways without Western help, aren't they?
Yeah, on the first part of your what you were talking about with the short term is definitely impacting those. As I told you before we recorded, the number one question I get now, usually I would say pre-COVID, the number one question I might get is either centered around money or safety.
Okay.
Now it's centered around, well, what happens if they close the borders? What happens if, with my plane ticket that I'm on? Well, again, before we start recording, it's kind of like playing the lottery in some respect. You're
Right.
buying a ticket on faith, which I know is not gambling, but you're buying it on faith. That's where God wants you to go. If something happens, we have to have faith that there's a reason it happened the way it did, and we got to, just regroup and move forward. Airlines, at least some, are being a bit more generous with credits, at least, being able to get a full credit for a future purchase, which is, not bad for me because I'll use it.
That's
But
right. Me too.
it is. It's the reality we live in, and either accept it or we don't. We can't complain about it. I mean, we can complain, I guess, but it's just reality.
We shouldn't complain about
And
it.
we just got to accept it for the time being. Businesses can choose how they want to do things, but they have no control over what the countries
That's right.
are dictating. And when it's not our country, I honestly don't feel like we have a right to complain. We've got to walk in. We've got to accept what they're saying because we're the guest. And if we don't like it, then we just don't go. There's no reason to go and complain about it. Just
That's
don't
right.
go.
And with short term, by the way, Steve, you think about a businessman taking a week off from work to serve in a place, and then all of a sudden he's 2 months in this place because the border's closed, and
Or they tested positive before. That's the other factor. What if you test positive while you're there? You're not getting on the plane, and you're going to be stuck, and it's a risk. It is total risk on your part to decide what you're willing to do.
And some will then make that risk assessment and go, not quite yet. We're not ready to do that, right? So
yeah,
definitely.
And regarding the nationals, that's a whole nother conversation right there. I know our friend David Joannis has, over the last, even before COVID, was really, there was an uptick in his rhetoric in terms of we need to do more with nationals. And I agree with him. I think if this didn't teach us, if it taught us one thing, it taught us we need to do more collaboration with nationals. We need to be creative in how we work with them. And we need to send foreign missionaries. And that's always going to be something that's going to be part of the Great Commission. But we can't be just focused on our home country that we forget that God has over 13 million national workers around the world. These are not just Christians, but people who have given of their lives to serve in a ministry vocational sense, and not just overseas. Or that includes people in the U.S., but the vast majority are going to be overseas from us. And I think when you ask that question at the end about national, the example that came to mind was China. So just without being specific on region, and COVID wasn't the only factor, but I think it was probably one of the bigger ones. There's a lot of expatriates not there anymore who are believers and who were serving in that country, and they were serving alongside locals and nationals. And when they left, I heard story after story of nationals feeling lost in the ministry because they didn't have their expatriate there to lead them, which plays into something you said, because we really need the nationals leading on the ground, where they exist.
Right.
Not the Westerners, not the outsiders, because when we leave, and I think this is a great example, it's going to happen, and it will happen again in the future, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's something else, a natural disaster. We're going to be forced to leave at times, and I think that's going to increase in the future. We need to really be empowering people on the ground. I say nationals and near nationals. So even those in bordering countries have greater access than we do. And so
That's
we need
right.
to really be empowering them to lead and to lead us and to really, so that when we're not there, the ministry keeps ticking forward.
That's
And
right.
and there's little
That's exactly right.
the hiccups or the parts of the ministry that close instead of the whole thing closing, it just gets hindered for a moment as the people who are still there get to regroup. But yeah, I think
That's
that's a
right.
big thing right now, and I think we really need to be looking even deeper at that. I'm concerned that some organizations are not. I really am. They're so focused on
They're not.
sending people in their home country, and it's all about their home country, and the rhetoric is all about the foreign numbers rather than really looking at the Christian workers, the whole numbers, the whole picture. And
That's right.
it's really concerning now. And I'd admit concern years ago. I was in that camp, but the more I became aware of it, the more I was educated in that, I'm at a point where I am concerned by that rhetoric. But I know there's some organizations like ABWE, like the Missions Podcast people that we know.
Mm-hmm.
Their organization works very closely with nationals. I think they have strong relationships with nationals, from what I understand. So there are a few out there who are doing it, but there are definitely many who are not. Not at the level I think that is going to keep ministries sustainable.
That's right. And so, Steve, I would say I would agree with everything you've said, and would add that I think, when we talked initially about there being a number of resets, this will be potentially the biggest, if not one of the biggest, right? That, I mean, the missionary attitude should always be, I'm coming into this place to really to reach some nationals, disciple them, and give the ministry away to them, right? In other words, I'm looking forward to the day when I can work myself out of a job and go on to something else, right? And so just what you've said about these Chinese dear brothers and sisters feeling lost, there was a piece of what the nationals did, or the missionaries did, that was missing, I would say, right? That you need to be looking towards, working yourself out of a job and having them become self-sufficient, because every day of the week, those people, those nationals, will always be better at reaching that country for Christ than we will ever be. And I learned that super quickly, right? That, man, I can learn the Chinese language. I mean, for me, it was China, right? I can learn the Chinese. I can, get a degree in Asian studies. I can, learn Chinese history, memorize the imperial kingdoms by order. And, but it doesn't, I'll just never be Chinese. I'll never, be as effective. And because when a Chinese then is reaching Chinese, there's just so much shared experience, shared culture, shared everything. And so that hopefully will continue. I mean, because at the end of the day, the other thing I was thinking, Steve, about when you were talking is that some organizations are not, doing this very well. Well, I mean, if COVID continues in the way that it's continuing, they're going to be forced to do that, right? Because right now, none of them can go there, and none of them can go to Indonesia and a lot of other places. And so if they have a heart to reach that place, that country, they're going to have to find other ways to do it, right? I mean, at the end of the day. And so that brings us to our second point, which is, that I do think that we just need to have a higher focus on maybe technology and other ways to be able to train nationals to do the work themselves. Steve, I've seen on, some of the Facebook stuff you've posted, I know Gandhi has done this, and others, where, they're using Zoom, they're meeting together. I mean, actually what we're finding is, a lot of us are getting tired of Zoom, but Zoom and Skype can be just it's not exactly the same as being face to face with people, but it's right next to that, right? It's not far away. Training that you via Zoom and other tools isn't there.
Absolutely, and there's definitely no substitute for in person. I would agree with
Right.
that. But,
Hmm.
you know, I think moving forward, there's too much that has changed in the last year and a half. And I just don't think, again, going back to business as usual is not what we need to do. We need to learn how to integrate this technology with in person periodically. Okay,
Right.
especially if we're not living
Amen.
there, if we're living in the U.S. like the two of us are now, and we need to make visits to different places periodically. It shouldn't be about just being there, because us being there does in some ways disrupt some of the ministry, because
It
the
does.
people on the ground have to think about us too. So there is a disruption that we cause to some degree. Not necessarily bad all the time, but and sometimes it's necessary for
That's
us to
right.
be there. But we can deal with issues a lot quicker if we're willing to embrace technology like Zoom or Zoom-like applications. In fact, I was having a conversation with two of our guys. One of them was asking, "Hey, can you guys train us in this subject matter?" And I said, "Sure." So we're coming up with a plan where I'm just going to create a video on the subject, train them and teach them, so they
Hmm.
could just continually rewatch it.
Oh,
And that's
see,
one of
that's
the things.
perfect.
It's one of the things I've learned, specifically from this one guy who made the request, is that yeah, he could sit through and learn it and understand, but then if he doesn't have access to thinking about it, or he's I don't know if he's how well his note taking skills are. I don't know any of that, but he really appreciates that when we do the training, that we have a video that he can reference back to and
Mm,
rewatch. And
that's
so
awesome.
that's technology we need to embrace, and there's ways to do it securely, or more secure than just throwing it out there on the open web, and
Right.
to make it available at any time. So, that's one of the things we're trying to do here, is to be able to do internal stuff, rather than say, okay, I've got to come to you in person, spend all this money, just because you definitely need training in this. Whereas now, okay, let's make a video. Let's post it on this place. We're going to encrypt it and secure it and all that stuff. And you can access it 24/7
Okay.
anytime you need to, and
Awesome.
rewatch as many times as you want. So, yeah, like you said, technology is something we really need to embrace even more than we have in the
Hmm.
past.
That's right. And so, Steve, talking about resets, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, I mean, I think part of the reason probably that some of these organizations are just sort of pining for the day they can get back to the way they were, right, before COVID, is that that's just how their whole organization is set up to do. That's just what, and including that's how they raise the money to do what they do, right? And so, in a lot of ways, we know that's a tried and true formula to be able to continue to keep the lights on with our ministry and continue to do what we do. And when I think, yeah, but a reset is needed, because I do think donors will still contribute towards, like, I hear your story about, you know, this video, and I think actually in some ways that's better because they can reference whenever they want. And then I think, oh, what if they had a whole catalog of videos, and so I think that's a part of it too. I think there needs to be a reset too, Steve, and this is a kind of our third point, which is just a greater necessity for collaboration. And so I do think that both from country leader to country leader and country churches to country churches around the world, there needs to be more collaboration. But then also,
Mm.
I think about from organization to organization, have to be more collaboration. The story I always tell about this quickly is when I first started in ministry, I was on staff with the Navigators doing campus ministry at Colorado State University. And I always remember that, the Navigators, we kind of had our things we did. And then there was Campus Crusade was the other big organization that was on campus. And it was towards the end, they were really good at the big event, evangelistic kind of campaigns.
Mm.
And we were always good at the small group kind of stuff. And, it wasn't towards the end until the end of our time that we began to talk to each other and say, hey, if we kind of work together a little bit more, because we were both very proud about what the Navigators do and what Crusade does and our own distinctives and all that, right? So, but and it really turned out great. Just that We did sort of a lot of joint events, and we were way more effective together for reaching these students than we could have been apart. And so, Steve, give us your thoughts about that. I mean, it seems like within missions post-COVID, collaboration is just going to become more and more important, isn't it?
Collaboration has always been a topic of discussion, especially at conferences. But I have found that rarely executed well.
That's right. I would agree.
There's always cases, and I can point to some where they were executed tremendously. But I don't find that's the norm. In fact, there's even talk in conferences of we need to collaborate better, and people, and I've experienced this where I've raised my hand and said, yes, I want to help with that, and then no one ever contacts me. Even when I reach out to say, hey, I raised my hand, still nothing. Nothing comes of it. And you just have to ask yourself, well, why were you even asking for help and collaboration if you're not willing to
Right.
embrace those who are offering to come alongside you?
That's right.
So, yeah, collaboration is always something that is a need. And, I have experienced competition on the field, for a lack of a better term, and that's definitely not healthy. I've seen some great collaborations out there, and I see places where people are just walking over each other, not talking to one another, and there's times I've walked away thinking, well, why aren't we working together?
Right.
But I've had people straight up say to me, we're not interested. We want to do it ourselves. We're going to do it alone.
Right.
I've had someone say, we know what we're doing when they're sending a brand new team into the field. And you're like, well, actually, there's no experience in the team yet.
Right.
But the statement was, we know what we're doing. I was like, all right, on. And so, yeah, but I do think, but even in respect to what we're talking about, and in light of what we've already talked about with nationals, I think there needs to be a greater emphasis on collaboration with nationals and a submission to nationals. I'll even throw that in our notes, but I would throw that out as we need to be willing to submit to the leadership of nationals. If it's their field, we have to walk in and start dictating the rules ever. And if they don't like something we're trying to propose, we don't do it. Or we go find another way to do it.
I mean, we're the outsiders in this situation, right? So
100%.
We did not grow up there. We do not know much of what's happening on the ground. So that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, I was at a conference where we were talking about, I won't say what the subject matter was, but it was a methodology, and they were really pushing the methodology to the attendees, which that was the purpose of the conference, so everybody knew. But I went to a national who was serving in his country, and I said, so what do you think about this? And he said, I don't like it. And I said, you don't like the method? You don't like what is it about that you don't like? And he said, I keep asking these foreigners to take me to these places in my country that they're claiming this is happening, and everyone refused me. Why should I accept it?
Right.
I was like, that is a great point. If they're claiming that this is X event is happening in your country, leading people to Christ, and they're wanting you to do what they claim is the best way to do, but they're unwilling to take you along and show you and let you talk to your fellow nationals on the ground, their experience. Yeah, I don't blame you one bit. Just toss it and move on. But that's kind of the mindset of outsiders coming in, sometimes dictating the rules, when in reality this guy is intelligent, he's experienced. We should be listening to him, to be honest, because in his context he knows far better than we do.
That's right. Steve, I keep trying to remember, and I can't remember the whole quote, but I remember listening to you on a podcast. You were interviewed recently about your book. And there was something about, that these nationals are, they're not something, but or something. Wasn't there a quote? I just think, there's something to be said about, these nationals are, you know, human people who have a lot of experience in their area, and these are not stupid people. I mean, they were called into ministry just like we were, and to let them take the lead in these places is just makes absolute sense. I mean, we can come in and provide some resources and some help, but I mean, these are not uneducated, unaware people, right?
Oh, let me tell you a colleague or an example. I have a colleague. He is technically not a national where he's serving. He would be considered a near national where he lives.
Okay.
But he lives in a place where he doesn't have access to a lot of training, really any training at all, and be able to afford to go to certain schools. He just doesn't have the resources for it to do it. Never has. And this was before I met him. So before I met him, because he didn't have the resources to do what most church planters get the privilege of doing in the U.S., he learned how to plant churches from YouTube. I guess when they say you can learn anything on YouTube, I guess you really can. So
You really
he planted 10 churches in
Wow.
2 countries
Wow.
based off learning from YouTube videos on church planting.
Wow.
Since then, he's planted a few more, but he's in his 20s, and before I met him, 10 churches solely based off you can't do that if you're an idiot.
That's
You
right.
have to have a level of intelligence to be able to comprehend what you're learning from a foreigner through a YouTube video in a language that is not your native tongue, and to be able to take that information and apply it to your field. 10 churches. Develop
That's awesome.
leaders, which we're working with him on that, and he acknowledges more training is needed for his leaders, but he's done a lot completely on his own before other people came alongside him. So yeah, they're
Right. And those are the
extremely
kind of,
intelligent people, intuitive.
yeah, right. Those are the kind of people that you want to be involved with, right? I hear that story and I'm like, oh, that sounds exciting. That's awesome. So,
And just because he
uh,
works for us with SRC as one of our workers, when I've said, "Hey, do you mind if I come visit?" his response was, "No, you can't, and here's why." And I said, "You're the boss. If you say I can't come for those reasons, I fully
oh,
respect that. We'll just when I come
that's
to your
awesome.
country, we'll meet in this city." And he's like, "That's fine. We can do that, but you can't come here for a number of reasons." Really had to do with just the negative impact on him and his leaders if someone like myself came in to their village.
Oh, right. That's right. And see, some organizations may get offended by that, right?
Oh,
What do you mean I
I
can't
had a
come?
conversation with a pastor who was offended by someone who did that to him, and he forced him to let him come in. It was just a terrible, terrible conversation.
Oh, see, yeah, that's bad. Well, Steve, so our fourth sort of challenge for missions post COVID is one that we've already kind of touched upon, but of course, this I just wanted to bring out this point, which is that for those of us who do feel called continually to go, we're just going to need to have greater flexibility due to the changing COVID protocols in different countries, and as and I were just talking about before we started, country by country, it's going to change. I mean, literally, it could change like while you're in the air on the way to that place, almost, because cases begin to spike, and that was the day that they go, okay, they've spiked too much. We're going to close this thing down, or we're going to severely restrict, or and so yeah, we're just going to have greater flexibility due to these changing standards, aren't we?
Yeah, and it's funny you put that in because I just had a conversation about this a few weeks ago with a missionary mobilizer in Southeast Asia. He's from that region, and
Okay.
he asked me the question, with all these restrictions, what kind of people do we need to be mobilizing? So we were having that conversation, and it really just boiled down to we need extremely flexible people. We need people who can leave at a moment's
That's right.
notice, even if it's a short-term
That's
trip.
right.
We need people who are willing to be able to adjust dates. Okay, this country, they closed the door, so we're going to hold off for 3 months. Or we're going to adjust to this country. I think it really just demands more flexibility than we're used to.
Right.
And if we're unwilling to do that, you just stay away. I mean, don't
That's
go,
right.
don't go on a mission trip. Don't go to the mission field. If you can't be flexible and just take whatever comes at you with these protocols, honestly, you're going to be miserable. And
You
you
are.
just stay home because it's just going to do too much, and you'll end up complaining, and it's just not worth it in the end.
Yeah, that's right. And so, it's interesting because, pre-COVID, people like you and I and many others were sort of wondering about the overall effectiveness of short-term teams, right? And is it more problems? So I've had a lot of nationals tell me that, in some cases that it's more of a problem for them, more of an
Mm-hmm.
issue just because they've got these 10 people now in their city and they're trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to feed them and how are we going to, and versus the overall benefit to what the team was there to do. Now, again, short-term teams have done a lot of good stuff too, right? But in some ways, COVID's just kind of taking care of that in some ways because, yeah, by what you've said, I mean, which I would totally agree with. The short-term teams generally were, okay, October 1st to the 10th, we're going to this place and, we've got an itinerary and here's where we're going to be. And, so then again, guys and people are, the participants are taking time off of work potentially to be there. And, they really feel like, that potentially is just not going to work in the same way because, yeah, you may get to 2 days before your trip and the country is closed and you've already came off and, so that's going to really change, I think, a lot of these short-term teams for sure. And even for those that are, feeling God calling them to live in a certain place, which again, there's still a lot of value on that as long as you're
Absolutely.
doing as a lot of what we've talked about, right? To kind of letting the nationals take the lead. And again, they're the ones that already have been there and grew up there and everything. So, that's going to change that a lot too. So Steve, as we close, I've got a few opportunities for us sort of going forward as it relates to missions post-COVID. Of course, in some ways, I think we've kind of already, those of us that are called to go overseas and have lived there, or for those that are our viewers who are praying about it, in some ways we've just kind of been through a mini version of the culture shock that we go through, and now there's a big culture shock that happens when we move overseas. But I remember, the first time in March of 2020 when I went to my local Walmart and I couldn't buy toilet paper and the chips that we normally buy, were not available. And, you get a lot of that when you live overseas, right? And so in some ways we've had kind of a mini version of that. So if you're feeling called to go overseas, it's like, well, you'll know a little better kind of what that feels like, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, when I moved abroad, I didn't have my chips and salsa like I was used to, and there's a lot of other things I didn't have access to, but yeah, I thought about that till I read your notes the other day, but it's right. It's true. I mean, we've, the toilet paper, the paper products, the food last year, food prices going up this year, certain things missing on the shelves.
You're right.
You are absolutely right. It was an unintentional preparation.
That's right. Kind of a mini version of culture shock because
absolutely.
And it was sort of weird how last year just certain things would then all of a sudden just not be available. Mm-hmm. Yeah, things that have just, you think about a big company like Walmart or some of our grocery chain stores, you think they could kind of keep their distribution network going, but literally it was probably the factory where they made this stuff had a COVID outbreak. And so they had to, shut down for 2 weeks or whatever it was. And so have a little bit about what you get when you do live overseas. And so there is some unintentional, as you mentioned, maybe some preparation for those viewers who are praying about, serving in an overseas capacity. The second one, of course, is that I do think we could use this COVID time to create a greater trust in God, right? Living through the unknown helps us trust him more. And I know for people like you and I, of course, we've had to trust God in different ways because we just can't do things in the way that we've done them. My story I've been telling people is that, about February of 2020, man, our ministry was just kind of cranked up to just, have a lot of really cool opportunities, and including, participating in some conferences, missions conferences here in the States, and doing some things overseas, and just all of that, just, having all of that shut down. Of course, I had a decision to make. I could have been angry at God, right? Or go, okay, God, you clearly, none of this has caught you off guard. I'm just going to trust you in a deeper way. And so in COVID season, we've probably Americans, and maybe even everyone around the world, has had plans that have been, disrupted.
Yep.
And our lives have not gone in the way that we've wanted them to go. And so for those of us that are Christians, it has sort of, I would just say, lean into that frustration and towards a greater trust in, what God is actually doing. Would you agree with that, Steve?
No, it's a great point. Here in America, at least as it relates to short-term mission trips or just traveling in general internationally, we've had the privilege for many years, just being American, to be able to hop on a plane almost anytime we want, as long as we have money and time, to go almost anywhere we want to go.
Right.
Some places, you've got to prepare a little bit in advance to get visas, but there's a lot of places we could go where we don't need them.
That's right.
All over the world. So, and so all that's changed, and so there is a increased level of faith steps we have to take now, and we just have to embrace it. I mean, walking by faith is just something God wants us to do in general.
Yeah, that's right. And so, and especially I think about those who maybe who have been making plans towards missions, a missionary opportunity or long-term opportunity, specifically overseas. And I would just say, if God has called you to anything, right? I mean, he's going to make a way for you to do it. Or, if God has called you to it, the timing is just going to be different than what you thought. And there's a reason for that. And a lot of times we don't like to hear that. It's kind of like we like to be the ones to be making the plans on our timetable. But, God's going to work it out. And so that kind of goes to the final word, Steve, of course, which is that, a lot of things may have been canceled during COVID, but, we know that the Great Commission hasn't been. Right. And so there is still this command for us to go and make disciples, teaching and baptizing them. That has not been canceled. And so we can continue to trust that God will want to use those of us who he has called to himself to fulfill the Great Commission.
Amen. I mean, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't matter what COVID protocols are in place. All those protocols are not preventing us from making disciples.
That's right.
May prevent us in how we approach it, maybe from a logistical standpoint, but it's not stopping us from making disciples.
That's right. And so it's interesting, Steve, to think about that, right? Because actually, one of the things I've said a lot over the last few years is that, more and more missionary sending agencies are asking the candidates, well, what are you doing locally to reach people for Christ? Right? There's nothing about a plane trip that's going to make you effective. And now that the plane trips are a lot harder to do, it's like, well, just dig, maybe this is God's call for all of us, really, to just dig harder into our local area. And even the episode of missions talk that we did from last time about refugees, maybe that just means we pour back into them, or pour back into international students, or it's like we can't go many places, but we all live in cities. Those cities have people that need Jesus, and just be good at reaching those people right where you're at. So,
Yeah.
so Steve, as we end, any final words from you?
I would just encourage everyone to be flexible, persevere, keep moving forward, making disciples, all those things. Don't stop. Don't let protocols discourage you, or philosophical beliefs about protocols to hinder your obedience to where God you. Because that's a potential, could potentially happen for some. But God knows all these things, and anything we have to do to take the gospel abroad, or where God's leading us, there's always inherent risk in that. Today is no different. And so just embrace it, and just trust that he's going to watch over you, and whatever, just trust that it's, he's got whatever the end result is in his hand, and
That's right.
the timing of that in his hand, regardless of the outcome.
Oh, wow. That's really great, Steve. That's perfect. It's a perfect way to end, because you're right. We may have had plans. Maybe we have plans in the future. Really the one that oversees all of that, right? So, and so just trusting him in that, I think, is good. So, well, that's a good word. Thank you all for joining us. I really hope this episode has been helpful to you. And of course, feel free to episode if you did feel like it was helpful. And we are always soliciting show ideas. And so I would just say, if you have a show idea for us, you can find us at Missions Talk. At facebook.com/Missions Talk. And give us your show ideas. We'd love to know what you want to have us talk about. And we're just so thankful that you've joined us for this episode. And we'll look forward to having you with us on the next episode of Missions Talk.